We have now a keynote by Sophie Treinen. Sophie Treinen is leader of the digital agriculture team at FAO in the regional office for European and Central Asia. So before she was the coordinator of e-agriculture community of practice at FAO, so she knows a lot about digitalization in agriculture. So Sophie, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. So I'm very happy to be here with you today and to share a little bit the capitalization on 20 years of FAO experience, starting with online knowledge sharing platforms on research and extension up to our digital agriculture policies, what we are developing with countries. So let me say a few words of the background and the UN milestones. So FAO started piloting projects with the use of information and communication technologies in the late 90s. And then in the early 2000s, there was the World Summit on Information Society in Geneva in 2003 and then in Tunis in 2005. And this World Summit on Information Society was timely because we understood that the technologies were changing the way we were going to live in the future. And in this summit, there were plenty of different action lines like e-health, e-trade, e-learning, and for agriculture, there was e-agriculture, and FAO was then nominated to be the facilitator of that action line to see what was happening, not only what FAO was doing, but what was happening in the world. And therefore, FAO and its partners, whether they were CG centers or World Bank, big institution, civil society organization involved in the use of ICTs at that time, decided to create a community of practice called e-agriculture. This community of practice founded in 2007 is still alive and decided to actually define what is e-agriculture. Nowadays, the terminology has evolved. We are talking more about digital agriculture rather than e-agriculture. But when you look at the definition, you will see that this definition is still valid today. So e-agriculture is an emerging field focusing on the enhancement of agriculture and rural development through improved information and communication processes. It involves the conceptualization, the design, development, evaluation and application of innovative ways to use ICT for agriculture. It includes standards, norms, methodologies, tools, development of individual and institutional capacities, and policy support. So you see here, we are already covering a few of the things that we have been discussing in previous sessions. Of course, we have the ICTs can play different roles in the different sectors of agriculture. And let's start with agriculture extension and advisory services. So this is where we started having our pilots, and I will show this with Welcome. Of course, ICT can have an impact on sustainable farming, disaster risk management and early warning system, enhanced market access, food safety and traceability, financial services and insurance, capacity development and empowerment, capacity development at institutional and individual level, and regulatory framework. And this is true for whether it's for data or if it's for other type of elements. So let's go back to the early 2000s with the virtual extension and research communication network. So at that time, FAO wanted to improve linkages among agricultural research, extension, and farmers. And the new technologies were really enabling to connect people who were geographically dispersed, creating a collaborative environment, promoting coordination and the better use of resources, so that, for example, research centers, extension agents could actually put together all the information that they had, so they could compare, they could update. It was possible to have a two-way communication. It was possible to increase system effects and impact, provide platform for discussion among information sharing, and having the information on time. It was possible to have better decision making. Also, it was possible to process and manage data quickly and cheaply and disseminate the information and knowledge in various formats using different types, not only computers, but also the radio, also the face-to-face. And this is what was done with WorkOn. So what was this WorkOn about? So the main functions of WorkOn were online multimedia, forum of discussion, chats, sometimes even email, because some people didn't have email, so it was offered by WorkOn. Question and answers. Question to directly either an extension agent who could reply, or didn't have the answer, then was asking for the research, having this collaborative approach to find solutions to farmers' problems, to have news and events, online database, calendar of activities, who is who, to know actually who is doing what in which type of sector in the region, to have the possibility of e-learning, online training, to have the technologies documented with the farmers. And this is the TECA database of FAO that was then decentralized at a more local level. Weather information, market price information, frequently asked questions, links to other websites, etc., etc. Some of these platforms are still alive, and this is the case, for example, of Platica in Costa Rica. But let's learn the lessons. How was it possible that some of these platforms either failed or are still alive? And this is because you see at the center of the circle, there is division. So the country knew where they wanted to go. So at macro level, there was a vision, there was a strategy for research extension, there were specific goals, there was a policy as an enabling environment. And then at meso and micro level, we could work at what you see in beige, which is the content. We could work better on the content, making sure that the content was available at a local level in the local language, with exactly adapted to the local context. This was something that was done with people in more brown, the technology in green, but we had to take into consideration also funding, finance, institution, how the institution was working on knowledge sharing culture, the ownership, the incentive, and the partnership, not to do it alone, but to do it with other organizations. So these were success factors. The success factors of the implementation of this virtual extension communication network. We continued, you remember I mentioned that there was the e-agriculture community of practice, and that we were looking at what were the trends, and we looking at the different types of projects, we look at what were the success factors for the use of ICTs. And the first success factor is what I mentioned with WorkOn, the importance of content which is adapted to the content. The second success factor was the capacity development, looking at what the institution needs, and then to see what the individuals have to do from the institutions, but also to see what the users will need to know to do, understand how to do it. To take into consideration as a third factor as gender and diversity, involving men and women extension, men extensionists, but also to have group of men and women involved, and that is our success factor number 4, is the participation and providing access to these new technologies. Partnership was mentioned in my previous slide and is repeated here. The technology is something that is a tool, a mean, but that should be really realistic for the users. And then the 7th factor, making sure that we have the 3 levels of sustainability: social, economic, and environmental. To these success factors, it's important to look at the 9 principles of digital development. And you will see that many of the things of the 7 factors are repeated in the 9 principles of digital development. But what is important to look here is to be data-driven, use open standards, open data, open source, and open innovation. And I can tell you that in the first platforms that were developed, if they were not open standards and they were proper used by with copyright or having to pay new versions, these are no longer there. So the importance of using open standards, open data, open source, and open innovation is something important, and address, of course, the privacy and the security. We should not reinvent the wheel, reuse and improve, and design for scale. This is how we have the possibility of the sustainability. So nowadays, these digital technologies are everywhere, and you see from computers, smartphone, web platform, remote sensing, sensors, robotics, Internet of Things, blockchain, software solution, digital communication, artificial intelligence, cloud, broadcasting, broadband internet. It's a lot more than what we were doing in the early 2000s. And this is why things are getting more complex. The digital divide existed in the early 2000s, but it still is a reality today. And we call this the rural digital divide. What we are noticing even today is that connectivity in rural areas is still unstable, irregular, of poor quality compared to the cities for the same or higher cost. I'm sure that many in this meeting today are facing exactly that. There is a lack of awareness of the benefit of the technologies in agriculture sector. So we still need to do a lot of awareness raising advocacy. But this works only if the technologies are adequate for smallholders' realities, if they are affordable. What we are also confronted with and could explain the rural digital divide is the lack of trust and confidence in the new technologies. And because also there is this problem of lack of digital skills. But in the agricultural sector, the equipment needs are different. They need to resist to hard conditions. Energy, the battery, the life of batteries for agriculture sector can be a problem. And we have also e-waste. So all these things have to be taken into consideration. And in agriculture sector, other speakers today have mentioned it, but I would like to reinforce this. The majority of farmers in the world are smallholders, and the farm size can be very diverse, half hectare to hundreds. Everywhere, the farming population is aging, and very often the young generation is leaving rural areas. And in some countries, there are shortage of farm labor. We are confronted, and we have experienced this during the summer this year and even in previous years, the climate variability and heat streams. There are still plenty of conflicts which affect agriculture. And COVID-19 has also repercussions on economic slowdowns and downturns. On more human and health side, we have the triple burden of malnutrition. And even in more advanced countries, we are faced by one of these. If it's not undernutrition, obesity is reaching us, and micronutrient deficiencies. So we are not eating well, healthy. Now, when we look at the common issues with digital applications, we will see, and we are now going to the macro level, we see that very often digital technologies, ICTs, are ad hoc, and they are not used as strategic tools. We are still in solution mindset instead of system thinking. We are reinventing the wheel. There are uncoordinated investments. There is a high cost of scaling up, limited system impact, partial views of the user needs, and inability to consider the user journey, difficulty to monitor, manage, and aggregate, and the data are not interoperable. So these are the common issues that we are facing, and therefore we need to reply to that. And this is why we need to have policies, we have to have a national framework. So with the International Telecommunication Union, FAO has been implementing projects trying to identify what is the national framework that is needed to take this into consideration. And the first project were piloted in Asia and Pacific, and as a consequence, we were able to actually develop this strategy guide called e-agriculture strategy guide. It was translated also in Russian so that we could use it in Central Asia and Russian-speaking countries of Europe. So what do we have in this national framework? When we look at the different building blocks that you see on the left side, first we have the leadership and the governance. So we need to have coordination, and we need to have institutions taking the lead. In the case of digital agriculture, obviously, we would say it will come with the Ministry of Agriculture. But it is important that it's not only this ministry. And if we have been joining forces with ITU, because we believe that the telecommunication ministries and agencies working on it should also be involved, because they are looking at all the different sectors, not only agriculture, also health, education, transport. Therefore, it's important to have also their involvement, because they will probably also work on the interoperability of the different systems that are going to be created in these different sectors. So having an understanding of who is doing what and who is going to do what and who is going to coordinate leadership and governance. Then really to see strategically where you have to do the investment. And that's why it's important to start developing this vision, and I will show you this in the next slide. To understand what are the service and the application which are already in place, but also what are those that are not there yet and that should be created. Infrastructure. I mentioned to you the digital divide. So it is important to work on that and to understand how it can be distributed more equally. What has to be done? What are the investments for the infrastructure? Then another block is the standards and the interoperability, making sure that things can talk to each other and that people are not only having standards at the national level, but also at regional level, so that food can move to one country to another, that we could have a better interoperability of the information. I mentioned to you with the work on the importance of content, knowledge management and sharing, and this is also true at the national level even more, because there is even more information, data, and that has to be organized. And legislation is always, or not always, but is sometimes behind the new developments. The technologies are moving faster than the legislation, the policies, and the compliance. Therefore, there is really a lot of work that has to be done to enable things, because technologies enable things, but then it can be restricted by outdated legislation. And then the last block is really about the workforce and the capacity development that has to be done, not only for the people, but also for the industry, for all the different jobs that are going to turn all around the use of digital technologies. So I mentioned to you, okay, we need then to have this framework, which is the e-agriculture strategy or digital strategy. How do you do that? You do that in starting by assessment and trying to see what do we have.
Sophie?
Where we want to go.
Sophie, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Can you have 2 minutes left.
Thank
please.
you.
Thanks.
Okay. National agriculture vision, to understand what is being done there, then to understand what is done in the IT sector, and then to actually see how the intersector can work together so that the strategy can be developed first with a vision, then a plan of action, knowing exactly what has to be done, how much it's going to cost, who is going to do it, and to have also a system of monitoring and evaluation, because when you are developing a strategy, it's not just for 2 years, it's for 5, 10 years, so you can have a larger vision and understand what can be done. And you then include, of course, all your different building blocks I have mentioned before. So what have we done? What we did in 2019 and 20 was to do a little review of what is the status of digital agriculture in the 18 countries of Europe and Central Asia. And the results are presented then when I explain you about the digital divide and all the challenges that we are still facing. And to reflect about what can we do, we launched also a contest to see what are the different applications that are being done, looking at the different sectors. And we came up with then plenty of good practices. And I invite you to actually see the result of this contest. So to go to understand these good practices, we are using experience capitalization methodology because what we want to do is to be able to generate change, to have people that can adopt, adapt, and scale up, and that we can also influence policies based on the experiences. In a nutshell, what we have to take into consideration, asking the A question, awareness, is it available, accessible, affordable, appropriate, adaptable, actionable, and trying to overcome all the barriers, the connectivity, the content, the context, the capacity, the confidence, and the trust. With the peer response, having the partnership, the policy, the process, the people-centered, the practices, and participation. And I would, on the IT side, people would say infrastructure, investment, innovation, inclusion. And ideally, we would like to keep it simple, mobile but robust, system approach, and sustainable. I would like really to strengthen the fact that we need to have participatory and people-centered processes. And this is why I have decided to add the Farmer Field School platform and the TECA database, because these are really the places where you can have ACAP in action: awareness, knowledge, attitude, and practice. If people are aware, have the knowledge to change, have the right attitude, and have put into practice, then we have won. And it's important to organize, to organize farmers, even with the new technologies. And the soft skills are crucial. And therefore, I wanted to highlight also this publication, which is more about how we can create social capital with the farmers and organizations. In conclusion, we should never lose the big picture. Why we do that? We have the 2030 agenda with all our SDGs, and FAO tries to embed this in its strategic framework. And we want to have better production, better nutrition, better environment, and better life. And innovation technologies, data are the accelerators, as well as the government, the human capital, and institutions. So this is, in a nutshell, what I wanted to present you from our first experiences to policies, from micro to meso and macro level. Thank you very much.